The lecture hall of the Zarkonian Institute of Advanced Learning was nothing short of awe-inspiring. Towering walls of shimmering metallic alloys seemed to pulse faintly with energy, as if the building itself were alive. The ceiling, a transparent dome, revealed the endless expanse of stars and swirling nebulae outside the station, reminding every student of their insignificance in the vastness of the cosmos. Rows upon rows of students from dozens of species filled the amphitheater, each one representing the pinnacle of intelligence from their respective worlds. It was here that only the brightest minds gathered, and even they struggled to keep up with the rigorous expectations of their instructors. Among the sea of alien students sat Wendy, the sole human in the room. Her compact frame and unassuming presence made her appear almost insignificant compared to the towering Siphonics with their crystalline bodies or the multi-limbed Sirionites, whose glowing brain sacs pulsed with every thought. Despite her apparent physical frailty, and the fact that her species was new to the galactic academic scene, Wendy had earned her place here through sheer determination and intellect. Still, it was impossible to ignore the glances of disdain and whispers that followed her wherever she went. Humans were often viewed as impulsive, emotional, and unsophisticated, hardly the qualities admired in a scholar. At the center of the stage, elevated on a platform surrounded by holographic equations, stood Professor Zarkon. His elongated form, draped in flowing robes of iridescent fabric, gave him an air of superiority that he did little to mask. His translucent skin revealed a network of glowing veins that pulsed rhythmically, as if synchronized with his thoughts. Zarkon was a Zynar, a species famed for their cold logic and unparalleled mastery of mathematics. Among his peers, Zarkon was a legend, a genius who had spent centuries refining the intricate field of galactic mathematics, a discipline so advanced that it required multiple layers of cognition to comprehend. He began the lecture in his usual commanding tone, his voice resonating through the hall without the need for amplification. Galactic mathematics is not merely a tool for calculation, he declared, his multifaceted eyes scanning the audience. It is the language of the universe itself. Only those who can grasp its complexities are fit to unlock the secrets of existence. Wendy sat quietly, her tablet poised to take notes. The holographic display before her projected equations that twisted and shimmered like living entities, each one more convoluted than the last. She frowned as she tried to follow Zarkon's explanation. The symbols, a mix of flowing curves and sharp angles, were utterly alien to her, and the professor's rapid delivery made it nearly impossible to keep up. Around her, the other students nodded in understanding, their advanced neural interfaces seamlessly integrating the information. Wendy, however, had no such advantage. Her species relied on old-fashioned cognitive effort, and in this environment, it felt like she was trying to swim against a tidal wave. Now, Zarkon continued, his tone taking on a sharper edge, let us see if our understanding has been adequate. He turned his gaze to the audience, his eyes scanning for a target. Wendy instinctively slouched in her seat, hoping to avoid attention, but it was no use. You, he said, pointing one elongated finger directly at her. Human. Wendy froze. A murmur rippled through the room as every eye turned toward her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, some curious, others amused, and a few openly hostile. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. Come to the front, Zarkon commanded. Her legs felt like lead as she made her way down the steps, the sound of her boots against the metallic floor echoing in the otherwise silent hall. When she reached the platform, she stood awkwardly, dwarfed by the towering professor and the imposing holographic equations that surrounded them. Zarkon's expression was inscrutable, but there was a faint glint of condescension in his eyes. Since you seem to struggle with even the most basic principles, he said, perhaps you can demonstrate your understanding of this equation. He gestured to a particularly complex formula that hung in the air before them. It was a swirling mass of variables and constants, interwoven with dynamic symbols that seemed to shift and evolve as she looked at them. Wendy's mind raced. She recognized fragments of the equation, something about energy matrices and spatial curvature, but the rest was an indecipherable maze. The silence in the room was deafening. She could hear the faint hum of the station's power core, the occasional rustle of a student shifting in their seat, and the soft clicking sounds emitted by a Sirionite's thought process. Wendy took a deep breath and stepped closer to the equation. Her fingers hovered over the holographic controls, but she hesitated, unsure of where to begin. "Any time now," Zarkon said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Laughter erupted from a group of students in the back row, their voices distorted by the translation devices they wore. Wendy's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't let them see her falter. She studied the equation again, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of it. Something about the way the symbols interacted felt oddly familiar, like a half-remembered tune. It reminded her of a theorem she had encountered during her studies on Earth, a principle developed by an ancient mathematician named Tavorian. She frowned. Could it be a coincidence, or had the creators of galactic mathematics drawn from the same universal truths? "You appear to be struggling," Zarkon said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Perhaps I overestimated your species' capacity for abstract reasoning." The room erupted in laughter again, and this time, even some of the more reserved students joined in. Wendy clenched her fists, her frustration boiling over. She wasn't going to let them humiliate her without a fight. "I'm not struggling," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I'm analyzing." The laughter died down, replaced by a tense silence. Zarkon arched an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her defiance. "Very well," he said. "Proceed." Wendy's hands moved across the controls, her movements hesitant at first, but growing more confident as she went. She began to rewrite parts of the equation, substituting some of the alien symbols with equivalents from Tavorian's theorem. The changes caused the hologram to flicker and shift, and a soft chime indicated that the system was recalculating. "What is she doing?" one of the students whispered, the translator rendering his voice in a tone of disbelief. "I'm correcting it," Wendy replied, not bothering to look up. Her fingers flew across the controls now, her mind fully engaged. The equation began to stabilize, the shifting symbols settling into a coherent pattern. When she finished, she stepped back, her heart pounding as she waited for the system to verify her work. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint hum, the hologram glowed bright green, signaling a successful resolution. A collective gasp filled the room. Zarkon's expression darkened. He leaned forward, scrutinizing the revised equation. "Impossible," he muttered. This aligns perfectly with the principles of the Tavorian expansion." Wendy allowed herself a small smile. "Of course it does," she said. "I recognize the pattern." The professor straightened, his face a mask of disbelief. "You recognized it?" he repeated. "How could a human?" "It's based on an Earth theorem," she interrupted. "One that predates galactic mathematics by several centuries." The room erupted into chaos. Students whispered furiously, their voices overlapping as they tried to process what had just happened. Zarkon, for the first time in his long career, seemed at a loss for words. Wendy stood her ground, her heart still racing but her confidence growing. She wasn't just a token human in this class. She had just proven that her species had something valuable to contribute. And this was only the beginning. The lecture hall remained in stunned silence after Wendy's bold declaration. She could feel the weight of countless eyes on her, some in disbelief, others in irritation, and a rare few in newfound respect. She had done it. She had corrected an equation designed to showcase the intellectual supremacy of galactic mathematics and, in doing so, exposed an uncomfortable truth. But there was no time to revel in the moment. She knew that what came next would test her resilience even further. Professor Zarkon's multifaceted eyes shimmered with what could only be described as incredulity. The faint pulsing of his veins, normally a slow and steady rhythm, quickened ever so slightly, a subtle indicator that he was unsettled. For a Zynar, whose logic-driven society prized emotional detachment, this was the equivalent of an outburst. He extended one of his elongated, semi-transparent fingers toward the hologram, which still glowed green from the system's verification of Wendy's solution. "This cannot be correct," he stated, his voice low but laced with an edge that silenced the room. "A mere human would not possess the capacity to solve an equation of this magnitude, let alone recognize its origins." Wendy squared her shoulders, refusing to let his dismissive tone faze her. "The system has verified it," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "The equation aligns with a theorem developed by a mathematician on Earth centuries ago. The principles are nearly identical." The murmurs among the students grew louder, and Wendy caught snippets of their conversations. Did she just claim humans invented galactic math? Impossible. Their species is barely out of its planetary cradle. It must be a fluke. She probably guessed. Zarkon raised a hand, and the murmurs died instantly. He was a figure of absolute authority in the Zarkonian Institute, and no student dared challenge him. Turning back to the hologram, he manipulated the controls with the precision of someone who had spent centuries mastering this discipline. The symbols shifted, expanded, and reassembled into a new form as he cross-referenced the equation with the Institute's vast archives. The process took only moments, but to Wendy, it felt like an eternity. Finally, the hologram projected a series of references, each one linked to an archive document. Wendy's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the name of the Earth mathematician, Tavorian, displayed prominently alongside the dates of his work. Zarkon's translucent skin glowed faintly as he processed the information, his features tightening in what Wendy could only interpret as suppressed frustration. "The theorem you reference," he said slowly, his voice devoid of its usual commanding tone, "bears undeniable similarities to what we have long credited as the foundation of galactic mathematics. However, these records indicate that your Tavorian predates the earliest documented works of the galactic pioneers by several centuries." A wave of shock rippled through the room, and this time it wasn't just directed at Wendy. The alien students, many of whom had been raised to believe in the unquestionable superiority of their own civilizations, were confronted with a reality they had never considered: that humanity, a species they regarded as primitive, might have played a role in shaping the very foundation of their studies. Wendy felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the realization of what this discovery meant. This wasn't just about proving herself in the classroom. This was a challenge to centuries of galactic academic tradition, and she knew there would be consequences. Zarkon turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Explain yourself, human. How did your species come to develop such a theorem? Surely it cannot be a coincidence." Wendy hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Tavorian's work was based on observations of natural phenomena, patterns in energy flows, celestial movements, and the fundamental structures of matter. He believed that mathematics was a universal language, one that could describe the workings of the universe regardless of where or by whom it was observed. It seems he was right. Zarkon narrowed his eyes, his glowing veins pulsing erratically. "And yet your species has made no significant contributions to the field since then. Why?" Wendy felt the weight of the question pressing down on her. She had asked herself the same thing many times. Humanity's progress in mathematics had been overshadowed by wars, political struggles, and the relentless pursuit of technological advancement at the expense of theoretical research. But she wasn't about to let him reduce her people to a mere footnote in galactic history. "Perhaps we've been focused on other things," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. "But that doesn't diminish the value of our past contributions. Tavorian's work laid the groundwork for discoveries that transcended our planet, and now, it seems, they've transcended species." Zarkon's lips tightened, and he turned back to the hologram. "The significance of this discovery requires further investigation," he said, addressing the class. "Until then, we will proceed with today's lecture. Return to your seat, human." Wendy nodded and made her way back to her desk, her heart still racing. As she sat down, she noticed that the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Some of the students continued to glare at her with thinly veiled hostility, but others looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and, perhaps, grudging respect. For the rest of the lecture, Zarkon's tone was sharper than usual, and his explanations were laced with a subtle undercurrent of defensiveness. Wendy could tell that the revelation had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. It wasn't just about the equation, it was about the implications for the broader galactic community. If humanity had contributed to the foundation of galactic mathematics, what else might they have to offer? And more importantly, what other assumptions about humans might be wrong? As the lecture ended and the students filed out of the hall, Wendy gathered her things and prepared to leave. But before she could reach the door, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with a Xiphonic student, their crystalline form refracting the ambient light into a kaleidoscope of colors. "I wanted to say," the student began, their voice a harmonious blend of tones, "that what you did was impressive. I never thought a human could well, you know." Wendy smiled faintly. "Thanks. I didn't think I could either." The Xiphonic tilted their head, their crystalline surface shifting in a way that suggested contemplation. "Maybe there's more to your species than we've been told. I think some of us are starting to see that." As the student walked away, Wendy felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something bigger than herself, a chance to change how humans were perceived in the galaxy. But she also knew that not everyone would be so open-minded. For every student willing to reconsider their biases, there would be others determined to hold on to their superiority. And then there was Zarkon. Wendy could still feel the weight of his gaze as she left the hall, his towering presence a reminder that her journey was far from over. She had taken the first step, but the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Still, she was determined to prove that humanity belonged in the galactic community, not as an inferior species, but as equals with a rich legacy to share. The corridors of the Zarkonian Institute buzzed with activity as Wendy stepped into the main atrium. Despite her efforts to remain unnoticed, the events of the lecture seemed to have spread faster than light. Alien students from different departments paused mid-conversation to glance at her. Some whispered behind iridescent hands or appendages, while others openly stared. The hushed murmurs followed her like an invisible trail, a stark reminder that her actions had shattered the unspoken norms of the Institute. Wendy tightened her grip on her tablet and quickened her pace, her mind racing with thoughts about what had just transpired. It wasn't just about correcting the equation or proving her worth. What she had uncovered, the connection between Tavorian's theorem and the foundation of galactic mathematics, was bigger than her, bigger than humanity. If true, it would force the academic elite to reconsider their assumptions about the origins of their knowledge. As she reached the exit, a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Human. Wait." She turned to see Professor Zarkon striding toward her, his tall, translucent form reflecting the light from the atrium's energy panels. His robes billowed slightly as he moved, and his multifaceted eyes locked onto hers with a piercing intensity. The murmurs around them died instantly as students scattered, leaving the two of them standing alone in the vast space. "Wendy," Zarkon began, his voice measured but firm. "We need to speak." Her pulse quickened. "About the equation?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Yes," he replied. "But not here. Follow me." Without waiting for her response, Zarkon turned and walked toward a restricted section of the Institute. Wendy hesitated for a moment before following him, her curiosity outweighing her apprehension. The hallways grew quieter as they moved deeper into the building, the polished floors and shimmering walls giving way to a more subdued and utilitarian design. Eventually, they arrived at a sealed door marked with holographic symbols indicating restricted access. Zarkon placed a slender hand on the panel beside the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a private study, its walls lined with shelves of ancient physical texts and holographic archives. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the archives casting eerie patterns across the surfaces. A single desk stood at the center, its surface cluttered with scrolls, data cubes, and intricate models of equations suspended in midair, Zarkon gestured for Wendy to take a seat, but he remained standing, his translucent skin faintly glowing with a mix of agitation and intrigue. "What I am about to show you," he said, his voice low, "has been classified for centuries. Few outside the Designer Council have ever seen it." Wendy's breath caught in her throat as Zarkon activated a holographic display embedded in the desk. The room dimmed further, and a series of ancient mathematical diagrams appeared in the air before her. They were strikingly similar to Tavorian's theorem but far more intricate, as if someone had taken the original and expanded upon it over generations. "These are the foundational equations of galactic mathematics," Zarkon explained. "They were discovered thousands of cycles ago by a coalition of Zeiner scholars. Or so we believed." Wendy leaned forward, studying the diagrams. The similarities to Tavorian's work were undeniable. The curves, the variables, even the underlying logic, it was all there. But there was something else, something subtle that she hadn't noticed before. "Look here," Zarkon said, pointing to a section of the diagram. "This symbol. It appears in your human mathematician's work, does it not?" Wendy nodded slowly. "Yes, but Tavorian referred to it as a universal constant. He theorized that it was a fundamental aspect of reality, not something unique to Earth." Zarkon's glowing veins pulsed faintly, a sign of his heightened focus. "That constant is the basis for our energy manipulation technology. It powers everything from our starships to our planetary shields. Without it, our civilization would not exist as it does today." The weight of his words sank in. Wendy realized that the implications of her discovery extended far beyond academic pride. If Tavorian's work had indeed laid the groundwork for galactic mathematics, then humanity had contributed to the very fabric of advanced alien technology. "But how is that possible?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could Tavorian have known something that aligns so perfectly with your discoveries? Earth didn't even have access to advanced technology back then." Zarkon's eyes narrowed. "That is the question, isn't it? One that demands an answer." He deactivated the display and began pacing the room, his movements more agitated than Wendy had ever seen. "The Designer Council has always maintained that our knowledge was the result of independent discovery. We assumed that no other species could have developed such concepts independently. But your presence here, and your connection to Tavorian's work, suggests otherwise." Wendy's mind raced. "Are you saying that your civilization might have encountered humanity before, maybe even influenced Tavorian's work?" Zarkon stopped pacing and turned to face her. "That is one possibility. Another is that your species possesses an innate understanding of universal truths, one that we have underestimated for far too long." The room fell silent as they both considered the enormity of what this meant. For Wendy, it was a vindication of humanity's potential, a chance to prove that her species was more than just a footnote in the galactic community. For Zarkon, it was a challenge to centuries of deeply ingrained beliefs, a realization that his civilization's pride might be built on incomplete knowledge. "I must bring this to the council," Zarkon said finally, his tone resolute. "They need to know what we've discovered." Wendy felt a surge of anxiety. "And what happens to me? To humanity? If they decide we're a threat?" "They will not," Zarkon interrupted, his voice firm. "The council values knowledge above all else. If anything, this revelation will elevate your species in their eyes. But there will be resistance. Not everyone will welcome the idea that humans played a role in our history." Wendy nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey, one that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But she also knew that she couldn't back down now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. Zarkon extended a hand toward her, his translucent fingers glowing faintly in the dim light. "Will you stand with me, human? Will you help uncover the truth, no matter the cost?" Wendy hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." And with that, the two of them set out to rewrite the narrative of galactic history one equation at a time. The chamber of the Zeiner High Council was a place of almost mythical significance. Built into the crystalline heart of the Zarkonian Institute, it gleamed with an otherworldly light, its translucent walls pulsating softly like the veins of a living organism. The energy of the cosmos itself seemed to flow through this room, where the most important decisions affecting the galactic community were made. Wendy stood at the center of the circular chamber, her human form dwarfed by the towering figures of the counselors seated on raised platforms around her. Each one represented a different species, their unique physiologies a testament to the diversity of the galactic community. The Zynar counselors, with their semi-transparent bodies and glowing veins, dominated the gathering, but representatives from other powerful species, like the Sirionites and Siphonics, added their voices to the assembly. Professor Zarkon stood beside her, his imposing presence a source of both comfort and intimidation. He had prepared her for this moment as best as he could, but nothing could have fully readied her for the reality of standing before the most influential beings in the galaxy. The lead counselor, an elder Zynar named Voes Tal, leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes shimmering like prisms. "You claim," he began, his voice resonating with the authority of centuries of leadership, "that a human mathematician, one Tavorian, developed principles foundational to what we now know as galactic mathematics. This is a bold assertion. Do you have evidence to support it?" Wendy took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes, counselor. The theorem that your civilization considers the cornerstone of energy manipulation and technological advancement aligns almost perfectly with Tavorian's work. I identified the connection during Professor Zarkon's lecture and confirmed it through your own archival records." Voes Tal tilted his head slightly, a gesture of contemplation. "Professor Zarkon, do you corroborate this human's claims?" Zarkon stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I do. The evidence is undeniable. The symbols, the equations, even the underlying logic, they all point to a shared origin. Either humanity encountered our knowledge in the distant past, or their mathematician independently arrived at the same conclusions." A murmur rippled through the chamber, counselors leaning toward one another as they exchanged whispers. The implications of this revelation were staggering. For eons, the galactic community had operated under the assumption that their knowledge was unique, the result of superior intellect and unparalleled innovation. The idea that a primitive species like humanity might have contributed to that legacy was almost too much for some to bear. Finally, a Sirionite counselor spoke, his brain sac glowing faintly as he processed his thoughts. "If this claim is true, it raises significant questions about our history. How could such a connection exist? Did our ancestors visit Earth? Did humans visit the stars long before we believed them capable? Or is it possible that there are universal truths that transcend species and civilizations?" "That is precisely what we must investigate," Zarkon replied. "This revelation does not diminish the achievements of the galactic community. On the contrary, it highlights the interconnectedness of all intelligent life. It suggests that we have more in common than we ever imagined." Another counselor, a Xiphonic with a crystalline body that refracted light in dazzling patterns, leaned forward. "And what of humanity's place in our society? If they are indeed responsible for contributions we have long attributed solely to ourselves, should they not be elevated beyond their current status? Should we not grant them greater access to our knowledge and resources?" This question sparked a heated debate. Some counselors argued passionately in favor of recognizing humanity's contributions, while others insisted that such an acknowledgement would undermine the integrity of their institutions. Wendy listened in silence, her heart pounding as she realized the enormity of what was at stake. This wasn't just about mathematics. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy, its potential to rise above its humble beginnings and stand as an equal among the stars. As the debate raged on, Voes Tal raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent. "Enough," he said. "We cannot ignore the evidence presented to us. However, we cannot rush to conclusions either. I propose that we form a task force to investigate this matter further. We will study the connections between Tavorian's work and our own, explore the historical records for any evidence of prior contact between our species, and determine the full extent of humanity's contributions to our knowledge. Wendy felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the definitive acknowledgement she had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. "I volunteer to lead the task force," Zarkon said, his voice steady. "As the one who uncovered this connection alongside Wendy, I believe I am best suited to oversee the investigation." Voestal nodded. "Very well. Professor Zarkon, you shall lead the task force, and Wendy, human, you shall serve as its co-chair. Your perspective will be invaluable in uncovering the truth." Wendy's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected to be given such a prominent role. "Thank you, counselor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let you down." The meeting adjourned shortly after, and Wendy found herself walking alongside Zarkon through the Institute's corridors. The weight of what had just happened was beginning to sink in, and she felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. "You handled yourself well," Zarkon said, his tone uncharacteristically warm. "The Council does not give such responsibilities lightly. You've earned their respect." Wendy glanced at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "It is," Zarkon replied. "But it is also an opportunity. An opportunity to reshape the way the galaxy views your species and perhaps even itself." As they stepped into the atrium, Wendy was met with a wave of curious stares and hushed whispers. But this time, the glances weren't solely dismissive or mocking. There was a new element to them: curiosity, respect, even admiration. She straightened her shoulders, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. Humanity had been underestimated for far too long, but that was about to change. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and opposition, but Wendy was ready. She had proven that her species had something valuable to offer, and she wasn't about to stop now. Together with Zarkon, she would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. And in doing so, she would help humanity take its rightful place among the stars as equals, as contributors, and as explorers of the universal truths that bound all intelligent life together. For the first time since arriving at the Institute, Wendy felt truly seen not as a human, but as an individual capable of shaping the future. And the galaxy would never be the same,